Greetings. In this video, you will hear the most interesting and scary 3 horror stories. I publish stories every day, so if you like these stories, you can subscribe so you don't lose my channel. Enjoy watching. The letters from below. The sun dipped below the horizon with a soft, golden hue, casting long shadows across the cliffs of Del Mar, the small village that had lived in isolation for centuries. The locals often spoke of it as a place where the sea and the land spoke to one another in strange tongues, where the winds carried secrets no one should hear. Samuel Bell, a writer known for his Gothic horror novels, had moved into the old manor overlooking the cliffs just a month ago. The manor had been abandoned for decades, its decaying walls and windows filled with the ghosts of long-forgotten memories. But to Samuel, it was perfect. The solitude, the mystery, and the persistent, foreboding presence of the ocean. It all felt like the perfect setting for the next chapter of his literary career. But on the evening of the 22nd of June, as a thick fog rolled in from the sea, something happened that would change Samuel's life forever. The first letter arrived in the Morning Post, as though it had materialized out of thin air. The postman was a quiet, hunched man with gray hair, who always delivered the mail promptly, without speaking. Samuel had barely noticed him before, but this time the man lingered, his eyes darting nervously toward the manor, as if he didn't want to leave. Samuel dismissed it as the odd behavior of a local. The letter was elegant, almost antique in appearance. The paper was thick, yellowed with age, and the ink was dark, vivid against the aged surface. Samuel's fingers ran over the surface of the envelope, feeling the smoothness of the parchment and the odd weight of the words already pressing against him. His name was written in sharp, precise cursive, each letter carefully formed, but there was no return address. No stamp, just his name. He carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The words inside were short, but precise. You must leave now. They are watching you. They know where you are. The sea will claim you if you stay. The letters will come. I am the last warning. The handwriting was jagged, as though written in a hurry, and the message itself seemed almost nonsensical. Samuel raised an eyebrow. It wasn't the first time he'd received an odd letter. His books had garnered their fair share of strange fan mail. He supposed it was just another overzealous reader. He smiled darkly, imagining the face of some hysterical woman or man, caught up in the fear of the supernatural that often colored his stories. He crumpled the letter, tossing it into the trash. That night, he sat in front of his typewriter, trying to write, but the words wouldn't come. There was an oppressive heaviness in the air, a sense of something watching him. It was as though the walls themselves had ears, or perhaps the manor itself had come to life. The darkness outside pressed in, the ocean winds howling as though they too were alive with dread. At midnight, there was a knock at the door, a sharp, insistent knock that echoed through the hollow manor. Samuel froze, his fingers trembling over the keys. Who could it be at this hour? The village was a mile away, and anyone from town would have known he didn't keep visitors at night. He stood slowly and walked to the door, his heart hammering in his chest. When he opened it, there was no one there. The only thing that greeted him was the cold mist from the sea, thick enough to obscure everything beyond a few feet. But there, on the doorstep, was another letter. No name, no address, just a piece of yellowed parchment, its edges fraying as though it had been handled too many times. He stepped back, uncertain whether to take it or leave it, but something compelled him to reach down. His hand shook as he picked it up, and as he did, a cold breath seemed to brush the back of his neck. He quickly closed the door behind him and locked it. The letter fell open in his hands. This one was more urgent. They know you've read the first letter. You think it's over? You think it was just some fan? They've always been here. They've always been watching. Do not go outside tonight. Do not look at the sea after midnight. Do not. The words trailed off, smeared with what looked like dark ink, but it was thicker than ink. It had the color of blood, and as he ran his fingers over it, he recoiled. It was sticky, almost viscous, and cold to the touch. His heart pounded as he glanced around the room. The shadows seemed deeper now, as though they were creeping closer, pressing against the edges of the room. The ocean, once a distant noise, now sounded closer, louder, as though it was being drawn toward him, just beyond the walls. With a steady hand, he turned the letter over, searching for more, but there was nothing. Just the ink and the words. The sea. Samuel opened the window and peered out into the fog, trying to see the dark shape of the cliffs and the rolling waves below. But all he could make out was an impenetrable wall of mist. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks seemed to come from all directions, filling his ears with a relentless, pulsing roar. There was something wrong with the way the water moved. It felt like it was alive, somehow watching him, drawing him in. Shuddering, he closed the window. By now, fear had begun to gnaw at him, creeping into his bones. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being hunted, or that something was lurking just beyond his vision, waiting for the right moment to strike. And the letters, they felt too real, too specific. That night, as the clock struck midnight, Samuel couldn't resist any longer. His mind was torn between the warnings and his desire to understand what was happening. He stood in front of the mirror in his bedroom, his reflection barely visible in the dim light. For a moment, he thought he saw something move just at the edge of the glass. But when he looked closer, it was gone, or so he thought. At precisely midnight, something changed. The mirror began to distort. The edges of his reflection seemed to twist, like the glass was warping under pressure. The figure that stared back at him was no longer entirely his own. The face was the same, but his eyes had changed. They glowed faintly, with an unnatural, sickly yellow hue, and his reflection began to smile, but it wasn't him. He stumbled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Then the whispering began. At first, it was a distant sound, as if coming from far off, but it grew louder, more insistent. The whispers, in a language Samuel didn't understand, seemed to emanate from the mirror surrounding him. He felt cold hands against his skin, invisible, yet pressing down on his shoulders, pulling him closer to the glass. Samuel tried to turn away, but his feet wouldn't move. His body felt heavy, bound to the spot by something beyond his control. His reflection smiled wider, its mouth stretching unnaturally, as if it was trying to break free. And then it stepped out. The figure in the mirror, his reflection, stepped out into the room, its form twisted and wrong. Its limbs were long and elongated, like something not meant for human shape, and its skin shimmered with an oily sheen, dark and wet, like something born from the depths of the sea. Samuel screamed, but it was too late. The thing reached out, its long fingers wrapping around his throat, its eyes glowing with an unearthly malice. It didn't matter how hard he fought. The thing was too strong. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. Samuel collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. But when he looked up, the room had changed. The walls were no longer there. The sea was inside the room, its waves crashing around him, a thick, salty mist rising, filling his lungs. The mirror was gone, and there, just at the edge of his vision, he saw the letters. They were floating, each one drifting toward him, as though carried on the tide. The handwriting was the same, but the ink was darker now, black as night. One last message. It's already too late. The Hollow's correspondence. Evelyn Harlow had always been a woman of reason, of facts and logic. As a historian and archivist, she spent her days cataloging forgotten texts and deciphering ancient scripts in the quiet of her small office at the prestigious Belvoir University. It was a job she cherished, where each discovery was another step into the depths of human knowledge. But when she stumbled across the collection of letters hidden in the dusty corner of the university's archive, it was the first time in years she felt a creeping unease. The letters were old, their paper yellowed with age, their ink faded yet still legible. They had been tucked away inside a forgotten box, left to collect dust beside piles of discarded manuscripts. The university records didn't list them. No one knew how long they had been there, or why they had been hidden away. Evelyn, intrigued by the mystery, began to examine them. The first letter was addressed to a man named Jacob Westbrook, a prominent figure in the late 19th century who had been involved in several historical and archaeological expeditions in the British Isles. The letter's envelope was marked with a strange symbol, a spiral that seemed to move when she tilted it in the light, and a message scrawled across the front in bold letters. Do not ignore. Inside, the letter began with a chilling message. Jacob, I am writing to warn you of the thing beneath us. The Hollow is no place for a man of your talents. I've made my mistake, and now it is too late. Do not go there. Do not open the door. You think you are in control, but you are only walking toward your own end. The Hollow is real, and it has been waiting for you. The handwriting was frantic, hurried, as though the author had written it under duress. Evelyn's fingers trembled slightly as she read it, but curiosity got the better of her. She began searching the archives for more letters. What she uncovered was a tangled web of correspondence, spanning decades, each letter darker than the last. The second letter was dated 3 years later. This one was written by Jacob Westbrook himself, the recipient of the first letter. His handwriting was remarkably neat, but there was an unmistakable desperation to his words. It has come for me. I have seen it, felt it more accurately. Beneath the Hollow, in the caves where no man should tread, something stirs. I've been drawn into its depths. It calls to me. I can feel it even now as I sit here writing to you. I am a fool, a man who cannot turn back. The door is open, and it beckons. I've made contact with the thing below. You must understand, it is not a god. It is not a creature. It is the Hollow itself, and I am trapped within it. Help me. If you find this, burn it all. Leave no trace. Do not come looking for me. Do not. The letter ended abruptly, as if torn in a hurry, the last sentence left unfinished. The edges of the paper were singed, as if it had been exposed to fire at some point. Evelyn could feel the hair on the back of her neck standing up. What was this place, this Hollow, and why had it been hidden away? She couldn't stop herself. She searched further. The more she read, the more she realized there was something far more sinister at play here. Something that connected the Hollow to a series of disappearances in the nearby village of Blackthorn, which had been all but forgotten by the rest of the world. Another letter arrived. This one, the most disturbing of them all, was postmarked just days before Jacob Westbrook's own disappearance. Evelyn, if you are reading this, then you have already found the others. You must stop. The Hollow is not a place. It is a prison, a place of waiting, where time and space do not follow the rules you know. You cannot understand it, not in the way you believe you can. I was a fool to try. I thought I could study it, learn from it. But the hollow is alive, and it wants something from us. It feeds. It knows us. It can sense our weaknesses. I cannot explain further. I only pray that you do not make the same mistake I did. Do not. The final letter was unsigned, and it was different from the others. It was not a plea, nor a warning. It was an invitation. Evelyn, you are too close now. You're already in its reach. The hollow will claim you, just as it claimed the others. The door will open when you least expect it. The thing below will find you and pull you in. You cannot run. You cannot hide. You are already in its grip. But come, you're welcome here. All those who seek knowledge are welcome in the hollow. The door is always open. The words seem to crawl off the page, seeping in her mind like a poison. Evelyn could feel the weight of their truth pressing on her chest, as though something unseen were watching her. Her pulse quickened. She set the letters down, her hands shaking. Was this madness? Was it real? Or had she stumbled onto something so dark, so beyond comprehension, that she couldn't even begin to understand it? The following evening, a phone call came. It was a distorted voice, static-ridden, as though it were coming from far beneath the earth itself. The voice whispered Evelyn's name, her first and last, as if it had known her for years. The words that followed sent a cold chill through her spine. The hollow is waiting for you. It has always been waiting. It knows you're coming. And now, Evelyn, you will come to understand. She hung up the phone, her heart racing. Was this another prank? She glanced at the letters again. The words swirled, dancing in her mind, beckoning her towards something. Something ancient. Something buried deep beneath the earth. And then, in a moment of terrifying clarity, Evelyn realized the truth. She had already begun to walk the path of the hollow. The next day, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find no one, but on the doorstep, there was a single package, wrapped in black cloth, tied with a thick red ribbon. Her heart pounded as she bent down to take it, her hands trembling. She unwrapped it slowly, and inside, there was nothing but an old, rusted key. A note was tucked inside the box. The paper faded and brittle. It's time to open the door. The hollow awaits. The key was cold against her palm. She didn't know why, but she knew what she had to do. The hollow was calling her, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. She had been drawn into its web, and no matter how much she resisted, there would be no escaping it. Evelyn stood up, feeling a strange calm descend over her. She had been searching for something her whole life, something that would reveal the deepest secrets of the world. But this wasn't knowledge. This wasn't a truth she could comprehend. It was a force, ancient and all-consuming, that had been waiting for centuries. And now it was her turn, the Cursed Chronicle. There were few people who truly believed in the old superstition that circulated around the Griffith Library in the small town of Harrow's End. It was a library like no other, an imposing, Gothic building made of dark stone that sat at the edge of town, its towers piercing the sky like jagged teeth. The library had been there for centuries, housing collections of rare, ancient texts, many of which had been mysteriously acquired by its eccentric founder, Nathaniel Griffith. Those who worked there often spoke in hushed tones about the library's history and its founder's obsession with the occult, but most dismissed it as nothing more than idle gossip, stories meant to entertain rather than to warn. That is, until Lila Harrison began her new job as the library's head archivist in 1963. Lila, a young and eager scholar, was drawn to the job not just by her love of books, but by a particular fascination with the library's obscure collection of journals and manuscripts. Among these was a volume that had long been kept under lock and key, the Chronicle of the Forsaken. It was a thick, leather-bound book, its cover intricately embossed with symbols that Lila didn't recognize. She had seen it mentioned in the library's catalog, but no one ever spoke of it. Even the oldest staff members seemed to avoid it. On her first day in the library, as she was given the grand tour by an elderly, stooped librarian named Mr. Alcott, she couldn't help but notice the strange tension in his voice whenever the Chronicle was mentioned. "You need to understand something, Miss Harrison," he had said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "There are some things in this library that you don't need to know." But Lila was persistent. Her curiosity was a force she couldn't ignore. One evening, as the sun began to set and the library grew quiet, she ventured down to the vault where the Chronicle of the Forsaken was stored. The vault door creaked open with a shudder, revealing shelves filled with dust-covered books, their spines cracked and worn. She felt a chill creep down her spine as she approached the book. It seemed to hum with a strange energy, a presence she couldn't explain. Her fingers brushed the cover, and the air around her seemed to thicken, almost as if the room itself had inhaled. Lila opened the book. The first page was blank, but as her eyes fell on the second page, the words seemed to appear before her eyes, as though written by an unseen hand. The writing was dark, thick, and unsettling, stretching across the page in a language she could not recognize. It seemed alive, almost breathing. To read is to know. To know is to awaken. To awaken is to become one with the void. The words echoed in her mind, and she felt an overwhelming wave of vertigo wash over her. It wasn't just the words that unsettled her. It was the weight they carried, a heaviness that seemed to sink deep into her soul. Lila slammed the book shut, her heart pounding in her chest. She had read it aloud, even though she hadn't meant to. She hadn't wanted to, but somehow the words had come out on their own. Suddenly, the silence of the library was broken by a soft, almost imperceptible sound, a scratching noise like nails on wood. Lila froze, her breath caught in her throat. The scratching continued, louder now, like something or someone was trying to claw its way through the walls. She rushed out of the vault and back into the main part of the library, her heart racing. But when she turned to look behind her, she saw nothing. The shelves were as still and quiet as ever. The scratching had stopped, but the unsettling sensation in the pit of her stomach remained. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the symbols from the Chronicle, flashing in her mind like a slideshow of nightmares. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had opened something that had been buried for a reason. But she couldn't stop thinking about it. She had to go back. The next morning, Lila found herself returning to the library earlier than usual. The strange noises from the night before still lingered in her mind, but there was an undeniable pull, an irresistible force that beckoned her back to the vault. When she opened the book again, the pages had changed. The once blank pages were now filled with more cryptic writing, the letters swirling in patterns she couldn't comprehend. Her eyes were drawn to a passage that seemed to pulse with dark energy. They are watching. They are always watching. Their hunger is endless. Do not call to them. Do not. Before she could finish reading, the door to the vault slammed shut behind her. The room plunged into darkness, and she heard the unmistakable sound of something, or someone, breathing in the shadows. Lila's pulse quickened as she fumbled for the light switch, but the darkness pressed in, suffocating her. The air grew cold, bitterly cold, and the hairs on her neck stood on end. Then, from the corner of the room, she heard the faintest whisper, a voice too soft to understand, but one that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It spoke her name, Lila. She turned, but no one was there. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, like a chorus of voices chanting her name over and over. And then she saw it. From the shadows, something moved. At first, it was just a flicker, a shadow in the corner of her vision. But then, it stepped forward into the dim light. It was a figure, tall and thin, with eyes that gleamed like molten gold. Its skin was pale, stretched tight over bones, its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. It was as if the very darkness of the library had come to life. Lila stumbled backward, her breath coming in frantic gasps. The figure didn't move, but the presence was unmistakable. It was waiting for her to make the first move, waiting for her to acknowledge its existence. The whispering stopped. For a moment, everything was still. The figure stared at her, unblinking, and then, in the coldest, most hollow voice she had ever heard, it spoke. "You have read the words. Now you are ours. The chronicle is only the beginning. We have been watching you for far longer than you think." Lila wanted to scream, but no sound escaped her throat. She turned and ran, crashing through the vault door, the darkness following her, stretching out like an endless void. She could feel the air shift behind her, a heavy presence that clung to her, whispering in her ears, taunting her. But when she reached the library's entrance, the doors wouldn't open. The lock refused to budge, and when she looked back, she saw the shadow standing in the doorway, its golden eyes gleaming, its smile wide and wicked. It was then that she realized the library was no longer just a building. It had become a living thing, a trap designed to ensnare anyone foolish enough to seek knowledge beyond their understanding. Lila's vision blurred, her breath shallow, and the last thing she saw before everything went black was the book, the Chronicle of the Forsaken, lying open on the desk, its pages now filled with her name, written in blood.